Good evening. I'm Mark Harris. Welcome to DiversiTV, Season 2. If you're just joining us for the first time, Lane Community College defines diversity in a number of ways beyond the usual ways in terms of affirmative action, which we are empowered to do in terms of legal compliance, which is ethnic minorities and women, and eventually, in terms of affirmative action. And the only reason I bring that up is because affirmative action is under attack. Sooner or later, everybody qualifies for affirmative action, not just the initial ethnic minorities and women, but also veterans of any description, people who are above the age of 40, people with disabilities. Sooner or later, everybody's included in that mix. So as chair of Lane's Diversity Council, one of the things in terms of perspective we look at is all kinds of ways that people get discriminated against. And one of the ways is that we're looking at this season and for succeeding season is the issue of class. Now, allegedly, America is supposed to be a classless society, ha-ha. Yeah. But it definitely plays out in a lot of different ways, and we'll try and look at that. So just to give you a hint of our mission, if you're just tuning in for the first time, our DiversiTV mission is to illuminate everyday diversity issues and give the mic and the camera to those who don't always get it. Now, of necessity, a lot of the folks that we have on the television on this particular show are people I know or have encountered, but basically, where we've gone over this season and where we'll go over succeeding seasons, we usually start with a native perspective, mostly because we're on native ground originally, and natives have a class perspective that we should look at and maybe seek to emulate at some point. But October 3rd was the native perspective. Then we had Anglos, then Africans in America, Latino, Asian, GLBTQTS, which if you're not up on the lingo is gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, queer, questioning, two-spirit. November 14th was youth. November 21st was disability. This week we'll be looking at class, and next week, the last show for this particular season, we'll be looking at spirituality and religion. Now, just for a little bit of setup, Isho said, if you would, Isho, who you know by his Greek name, Jesus, but what his mama named him was Yeshua, or Isho for short. He said, it was easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to get into heaven. Now, if you go back to the original Aramaic, in Aramaic, the word for camel and rope sound the same and are related in terms of spelling. So this is kind of like a double entendre, because rope symbolized as a person's wealth, because it's very thick, it's a burden. If you use the image of rope as a wealth, interlocking strands of it, in order to get that rope through the needle, you have to unravel it. So he's kind of making a joke about, right, camel through the eye of the needle, right? So basically what you're exhorted to do then is give it away, let go of your attachment to it. And so if we unravel this whole construct of class, in an earlier episode we talked about Remy Calalang and my construct of CRASH, and that's an acronym for classism, racism, addiction, ability, age, sexism, heterosexism, by which we mean this, in this convenient acronym, interlocking systems of oppression. So it's not so much that people are more oppressed than others, but that they all kind of combine and interact with each other. So part of our universal practices within CRASH is to look at, okay, how are these particular systems of discrimination put together? So if we look at what class is, how we think of it in America, go back to slide. Classism is basically discrimination, a set of discrimination based on social class. And if we look at how we talk about that in academies, socioeconomic status, what SES is the intersection of education, occupation, and financial earning power. So education, basically the idea being that the more you go through regular school, get degrees and all that kind of stuff, your earning power goes up, and your occupation can command more earning power. Cultural capital is, within this concept, is unapologetic credibility. So, for example, when we've talked about this in earlier shows, when people call and make an appointment with Mark Harris, and I basically speak in what I call LA newscaster English, that kind of accent, which in LA we don't think we have an accent, but somebody walks into my office, and this has actually happened in a number of times. They walk in and they're looking for Mark Harris, right? And they don't expect to see me looking like this, right? And they said, "Oh, you don't look the way you sound over the phone." And I say, "I look taller?" And they go, "Yeah." Well, how did I look? Well, 6'5", blonde hair and blue eyed. Yeah. Oh, I sound like a blonde guy. Okay, right.
Yeah, blonde.
Okay, right. So part of my cultural capital is the fact that I can make my voice sound quote unquote white and not look like a black person, so they felt safe in talking to me over the phone, but all of a sudden, boom, here I am. So the cultural capital, that concept, if you go back to slide, unapologetic credibility, part of it is conferred by how you talk, how you sound, that you're educated, that you're safe, et cetera, et cetera. And there's other ways of having cultural capital, but it's also a class assumption. So part of your education also gives you financial health and empowerment, gives you status, which is definitely a class concept. And within class, we look at, with the economy, the whole idea of capitalism versus, for example, the indigenous concept of a gift economy, in what, instead of money, what you're trading is spiritual wisdom. Cooperative businesses, communalism, indigenous barter, itandas, those kind of systems. And so our guest tonight, giving us a perspective on class, is Sky Rios. Welcome.
Thank you.
So what is the organization you work with?
Well, right now I'm working with Communities Empowering Youth on a documentary video surrounding the issues of homeless youth in Eugene.
So one of the people that referred, our mutual friend Martin,
yes,
said, quote, "Well, Sky's lived in poverty all his life." Well, what does that mean?
So the way class is often defined is oftentimes people will associate class directly with money.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And
right.
so on paper, I look extremely poor and extremely lower class. My mother makes $6,000 a year.
Okay.
We're on food stamps.
Okay.
But the way I view my class, well, I guess I'm definitely a mix of classes, but I feel upper middle class. Both my parents are they have degrees.
College degrees.
College degrees.
Okay. Yeah.
Whether they've used them or not, but they choose to live a much less consumeristic lifestyle.
Yeah.
Than others.
And in order to be a consumer, you definitely have to have a job,
capital,
using your degree, capital,
yes. Yeah. And so that's how I could get away with saying that I've lived in poverty, all my life, and make it kind of be a true statement. But I've always had food on the table because really I can walk outside and there's a garden big enough to feed me. So
okay.
I haven't lived the same version of poverty as many other people.
Yes. So you've never gone hungry.
I've never gone hungry.
You've had food on the table, clothes on your back, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You
my
drove
parents
here
are
in a car, so, all right.
Yeah. That's temporary.
It's okay. You had one, right? So, for example...
right. My grandmother just gave me a car because my family has enough money.
All right. So, so when we talk about class being about money, right?
Right.
And, you've never gone hungry. What is some of the work, when you're dealing with... So, have you lived in Eugene all your life?
No, I grew up in a suburb of D.C.
Okay. All right. So, why did your parents choose to come here?
A lot of reasons. Both my parents were living in the until I was 11, and they got divorced when I was 6. So they were just trying to, they were friends. But I didn't get along with my brother very well, and my mother grew up in Seattle, which Eugene is a lot like Seattle was 40 years ago. And so she came here, I followed her. That's when I was 11, so I've been here for the past 5 years.
Okay. All right. How do you find this community? Culturally, environmentally?
I think that there's a lot of culture in Eugene, in some aspects.
Yes.
And then...
Culture is a very class-ridden word,
yeah,
too.
And it has a lot of different definitions.
Yeah.
And then we're also lacking culture in a lot of ways as well.
Okay.
It seems like there's a lot of people in Eugene that are pretty ignorant about different kinds of oppression that goes on within our community, and they like to put a mask on it, and they like to ignore it, that there's oppression in our community. A lot of people here think that we're a completely open and loving society, but I think that's because those people who think that fit into a box.
Yes.
That's very accepted
Right.
in Eugene's
Right.
society.
Right.
Hippies
Yeah.
are very accepted in Eugene's
Right.
society, whereas people, hippies I don't know what you want to call a hippie, but those people aren't, maybe not be received as well in other places.
Certainly not in D.C., for example.
Definitely not.
Right. I guess one of the jokes when I first moved here from L.A. is, when I went to the unemployment office, because I was basically collecting unemployment from a particular job, and was looking for work, and then was going to look for work in Eugene, and the joke was, why did all the hippies move to Eugene? There's no jobs here. Right? Ha ha ha.
Yeah.
Right? And when I first started working for Whitebird,
right,
and full-time work, okay, was paying $600 a month.
Well,
which, as a drug counselor,
yeah, that's not very
because it was a collective, and it was the first job that I'd ever had that I qualified for food stamps.
Right.
And working full-time.
Right.
And I only got food stamps for 1 month because I made $50 too much.
Oh, wow.
Right? Making $642. Like,
yeah, that's
okay.
messed up.
Well, all right. And I was still able to live on that. And, it was kind of ironic that, right, now
Did
I
you have a family at that point?
No, that was
not
before I met Iana's mom, and Iana's mom, which because there are a lot of folks working, without using their college degrees.
But a full-time job is supposed to be able to cover you and Roby and Iana,
right.
A family.
Right. And she was a business owner, owning part stake in Genesis, the cooperative.
Right.
Right. And Whitebird at the time was a collective, so same idea. She was a business owner, but she was pulling in $250 a month, full-time work.
Yeah.
Right? So more than 160 hours because you're an owner and you have to work as many shifts as you can, and it's still $250. Now, her rent at the time was $50 a month. My rent for my apartment in Eugene was $200. So sure, I was able to live on that.
Right.
And go.
But you're also a very resourceful person.
Yeah.
And not everyone has the equal amount of intuition in like dealing with things.
There is, there's a certain wherewithal in terms of being able to hustle in terms of class, right? So yeah, your mom may only make $6,000, a year, and that's like way below whatever the defined poverty level is, which is something like around what, 18,000 now or something like that, for whatever family. But you become resourceful, right? Right. So one of the things that we often deal with in terms of Eugene, with the issue of homeless youth that you're working with, is what kind of homes do these youth come from?
Well, I wrote a letter to the editor, and someone wrote back, calling me naive and completely disagreeing with what I was saying. I was saying that there's not enough resources in Eugene for a lot of homeless youth to survive, and which I think is true. And he came back with the perspective of being a homeless youth. He wasn't anymore, but he was at one time a homeless youth in Eugene. And he said that he just ran away and he could have just gone back to his loving family. But not everyone has a loving family to go back to. And so there is that percentage of people. There are youth in Eugene who could go back to their loving family, and there's youth that can't. Right.
Because specifically, I've dealt with this from the counselor. Molestation,
drugs,
violence, drugs.
I mean, the whole
Mom
spectrum.
and Dad run a meth lab, so on the surface they look like a respectable family because they've got money and cars and all that kind of stuff, but it's dangerous to live there.
Yeah, and abusers.
Right. Abusers.
More often than not, come across as very mild-mannered people when you meet them.
Yes. Sociopaths.
Exactly. They come across like that so that they can present an image of being well together, well put together. Yeah. But and so often, like when they're even reported by the police, like I've definitely had friends who the police didn't believe. Because
of the way their parents presented.
Right, because of where
there's certain class assumptions. Oh, well, how can you leave a home like this?
Yeah, it looks nice.
You're just being a rebellious youth, right?
Yeah.
And that was the assumption of the letter writer. Oh, well, yeah, I was just being a rebellious youth, leaving a loving home, and I came back. But okay, some people shouldn't go back to their loving homes, and there is the issue of who's going to believe who, even if you do call. Protective services.
And it's also true that a lot of people, after they get out of these bad situations, will blame themselves or like say that they had somewhere to go back to and made a bad decision. Yeah. But like a lot of times it's a cover-up for like bad experiences they've gone through.
So you're working on this film. Who's going to be behind the camera? And who's going to be behind the mic? And who is the mic going to be aimed to?
Well, so one of the people that we're going to be interviewing is Kitty Piercy, and we're going to be asking her some standard questions that we're going to be asking everyone about how she thinks Eugene is doing in regards to dealing with homeless youth appropriately. And then we're going to ask the rest of the homeless youth the same questions, as well as getting their specific stories. Yeah.
How long? Feature length? Hour? What?
No, it's a very short film. It's like 7-8 minutes.
Okay.
Very short. So far, we've interviewed. We're just in the kind of beginning phases. We've interviewed 6 or 7 youth, and the director at the library. And we haven't interviewed Kitty Piercy yet, but we do have an appointment.
So what do you aim to do with a short film like that?
Well, I mean, my personal objectives with this film is to show it to as many like middle-class people in Eugene as I can to just raise awareness, because I think a lot of people don't even realize what a lot of these youth have to go through. Yeah. And we're going to be presenting this to our grantors and like a lot of other people. I'm not exactly sure on
Who funds you?
Communities Empowering Youth.
Okay.
I think I don't know.
Okay.
I really don't care as
right.
much about
right.
who's funding me
Yeah.
as much as that the money is there to complete the project.
Okay.
And I personally care a lot about this project.
Okay.
And I'm not as tied into where the money's come from as my boss, Martin.
Okay. Oh, Martin's on. I get it. Okay. So, you open a suggestion.
Yes,
All right.
definitely.
So this is not so much a class thing, but just kind of, I guess, buying an education does get you something. Okay. There is a strategy called media advocacy.
Okay.
Which is not you're advocating for the media. You're using the media to basically push a policy agenda, and policies about power and who's got it, who doesn't, and to make specific policy changes, right?
Okay.
So, for example, the piece about using the mayor, okay? So you go to the top of the city hierarchy,
Right.
local politician, right? Who, could say, all right, we've had this problem with homeless youth for a long time, especially with the issue of downtown. So, having worked as a counselor in terms of looking at this issue, a lot of the youth are homeless, because we've talked about, hey, they come from abusive homes, and there's not enough money if you're not a little kid,
right,
to serve them. So if you're like a teen and you're on the street, well, tough luck.
Yeah, for sure.
Pretty much, right? Which is a choice that somebody's making at some point in terms of
Right.
resources, right? So what does it take? So, part of what you're doing is a good battle tactic, to illuminate the issue. But then having as part of that in your 7 or 8 minutes, if you lengthen it to 20, to say, okay, we need this and this and this to happen, and we need this much funding, and United Way, can you
Yeah.
give this money to CEY or whatever your policy suggestion is?
And I mean, I wouldn't be as upset about how we're dealing with homeless youth if we really didn't have that money.
Right.
But there's such a hugely, like the distribution of wealth
Yes.
in this world, in this country, just how we spend money, who we're giving money to, and tax incentives to, is so messed up currently. And the wealthy, right? The people who are wealthy today, I feel is their wealth. A lot of it comes from stolen money, stolen from the slaves, stolen from like anyone who's underpaid. It's stolen from. And there's a lot of people out there who have been underpaid and are being underpaid in other countries, in this country. And so these families that have money, that go back all the way down to slave owners, they received value, worth.
Yes.
They took something valuable, labor. That's really what money comes down to, labor, power. They took labor from slaves really not that long ago in the scheme of things.
Right.
Long enough that that money has stayed in the family.
In my family,
and
in the
accumulated.
families, 4 generations. So
Right.
a little over a century.
That's
Yeah.
4 generations.
Yeah.
That easily passed down.
Yeah.
And this money has accumulated, and then they're living off their interest. How messed up is it that if you have $10 million, you don't have to work at all. You put it in the bank, and the bank gives you more money.
Right.
Enough
interest.
money to live
Right.
on in interest.
The interest on $1 billion, or the interest on even several million dollars, is enough to live on.
And if you have $1
forever,
billion,
right?
you could easily get 10% interest. But let's say you get 5, like anyone would.
Yeah.
The interest on $1 billion would be like 5 million or something. 5 million?
Well, it depends.
50 million.
It depends.
Yeah.
It's a considerable sum. So, You raise a lot of interesting points here, right? Because and many of them near and dear to my heart. So when I teach a class talking about, say, the profit on slavery. So there's a book by a black economist, Claude Anderson, called Powernomics. So one of the things he talks about in terms of history is the profit on a slave. If you owned a slave, free labor, as you pointed out, and you basically if you think of money as surplus labor, basically, the idea that if you're a family, an economic unit, and you have a little piece of land, you can provide for your own well-being, your own food, et cetera, keep all that within the family, then what money symbolizes is your ability to survive beyond that level, and that's what you trade, essentially. That's what the medium of exchange is about. Well, with slavery, the profit on a slave, say if somebody bought me and, at my age or 52 or whatever, so, my value goes up if I'm younger, more able-bodied, et cetera, et cetera.
Type of work.
The profit on a slave is 1,500%.
1,500%.
1,500%, which is basically in terms
Percent of what?
Whatever you bought the slave at. So if we're talking about, 19th century dollars when slavery ended, right?
Okay.
Let's say you paid $800 to $1,500 for a slave. That slave over his or her lifetime will generate you $1 million profit.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In terms of labor, right?
Yeah.
Which means the more slaves you own, you can basically pass down that accumulated wealth down to your family. So it doesn't even matter, even if your family didn't own slaves, which is usually the argument, given.
Right.
That, oh, well, I didn't own slaves. Why should I pay reparations to these people, et cetera, et cetera?
Right.
Well, no, you actually have an advantage passed on to you
in
terms of being able to get jobs, being able to be considered creditworthy at a bank, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
A cumulative benefit, right? So that's why when we look at the whole issue of class, and in our crash model, we're saying, okay, it's not just being rich, wealthy, and white. It's also basically being educated. It's also being male. It's also not everybody's being treated equally, that some people get advantages for their external characteristics without necessarily being better.
And like you were saying before, the test that you play on people, like, I don't know if you've changed your accent or worked towards like getting a generic white male accent.
Well, I do have the ability to take on various accents at various times, but
yeah, I mean, it seems like you've owned that in yourself, that you can play different roles, and especially on a phone when someone can't see you, they treat you better. They think you're more honest. They think you're safer to talk to, because they assume you're white. And so,
which is cultural capital.
Right, cultural capital.
Yeah. Okay. So that's why we were talking about that concept within class. Cultural capital. So it's unapologetic credibility. Okay. So, oh, you speak very well. You're very articulate. Like, okay. Well,
so that makes me a better person.
Yeah.
I must not steal because I can talk better.
Right.
Because there's no white collar criminals. We know that, right?
Well, we know for a fact that you could steal more money with a computer than you can with a gun.
Yes, that's definitely true.
And so again, when we're talking about being, you called it, so white collar criminal. So even that idea of white collar is a class assumption. So white collar versus blue collar versus pink collar. So women, getting paid less money for doing the same work, or being considered, less worthy because even though they have the same training. That's actually one of the issues I had been dealing with earlier today. Was how does a woman in the trades get treated versus a white man in the trades versus a man of color in the trades? So the woman and the person of color in the trades gets discriminated against in a historically good old boy environment, which Lane County definitely is. Right. As well as America is. Right. And so when we look at the issues then of class and then apply those to youth, you may actually be more skilled than somebody twice your age, but you're assumed to be, what is the phrase? Callow youth.
Callow youth?
Callow means actually, it refers to a bird, a baby bird that has feathers that aren't big enough to fly. Right?
Got it, yeah.
So that's where, you're young.
Yeah.
You're not experienced, you're naive. I mean, so they use all those phrases, right? Use your age to quote the Indigo Girls, use your age to psych you out, you're, too old to care, you're too young to count, right?
Right.
So those are often class assumptions. So when you talk about, being able to articulate and advocate for homeless youth, just, as a point of strategy, you need to be able to talk about issues of money because that's one of the things they'll hold against you. Because there has been, in one sense, in America, we're all wealthy.
Yes.
In the idea that, let's see, the quote that I've heard that I used about 20 years ago. Basically, if you have more than one pair of shoes, 2 changes of underwear, a choice at any given meal of 3 different entrees in that meal, access to any form of transportation more than walking. So even a bicycle.
Right.
But, public transportation, cars or whatever, plus shelter. You have more than 95% of the people on the planet. And that was in the 80s that they were talking about.
95?
Yeah. Definitely 80.
I would say 80.
Definitely 80, okay? So when we're talking, and that isn't even figuring into how much money you have in your pocket.
Yeah, I would say definitely 80 because I think I've heard a statistic recently that said that 5% of the people on the planet own 95% of the wealth.
Yeah.
So.
Right. And if you shrank the world to a village of 100 people, none of them have a computer.
Right, definitely.
Essentially, yeah. Or the Americans have their computers, etc. Yeah. Right. Well, that's changing. So that's what I mean. All right. So when we look at, in a global context, this issue of class, I mean, sure.
Definitely.
Americans have more than a lot of different people, and certainly, in terms of the ecology, especially now that we're looking at the whole global warming issue, 1 birth in America is worth 35 births in India in terms of the effect on the planet. So you were on this television show.
Indeed.
Can you tell us about that?
Well,
name the television show.
I was on the television show Wife Swap.
All right, which is an interesting conversation on class, though that wasn't the focus of the television show.
It was not. The focus of the television show is drama. But, I guess they would say that the focus of the television show is comparing lifestyles.
Yes. Which in itself is about class, really.
Yeah.
Or certain class assumptions, anyway.
Yeah. I don't know really what to say about the show.
So I'll ask you.
Okay.
All right. So in Wife Swap, which is usually about this whole, that term actually is kind of like a sexual kink, right?
they
I'm going to make the
sleep in
assumption
different
that
beds.
Rob didn't sleep with his woman.
No.
Because wow. Anyway, so the differences in lifestyle, because basically you live at Maitreya.
Yes. It's an eco-village.
It's an eco-village. And the wife that was being swapped, lived in how many bedroom house?
I don't know how many bedrooms they had. They had like 9 cars.
9 cars for a family of how many people?
Oh, 3.
3 people. 9 cars.
Had a lot of dogs, though.
A lot of dogs, right. And it seemed on camera this woman was she treated the dogs better than her child and
Definitely
her
better
husband.
than her child and her husband.
Which was deep, considering, how much money we're talking about being lavished on this dog. It was.
But, so
And so the television show, of course, focused on, those things, because then she comes to Maitreya, right, where a lot of airtime was talking about, oh, well, they pee in this bottle to use on their garden. Yeah, to use on the compost, and I don't think I'm going to eat vegetables. You need some meat up in here, and yada, 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 right?
Yeah.
So
I got along with her actually a lot better than I expected, because she wasn't fake about who she was at all. My stepdad didn't get along. Like, obviously I have a lot of different views from her, and a lot of different I come from a different culture as her.
Yeah.
But nothing but I mean, I'm used to that. Like, there's people that you interact with every day from extremely different backgrounds. And she wasn't, like, lying about anything. She wasn't really that much of a hypocrite. I mean,
Talk about some of the things she talked about in terms of the contrasts in class issues and class assumptions.
She came from a very poor family, right?
Okay.
And so when she, like, married a man with a lot of money, she was like, this is success. That's what success meant to her.
Right.
She was poor, now she has money.
Right.
This is success.
Okay.
That's her frame of mind. That's her view.
Right.
Which is understandable.
Right.
It's ignorant, but it's understandable.
Why is it ignorant, do you think? I mean, I agree with you.
Because it's success at the cost of somebody else.
Yeah. Well, there's a human cost, because even though she's physically now wealthy,
right?
All right, there was very little love and affection shown in her house, in her environment.
Right.
Okay, she was not very affectionate with her husband.
She showed that through her love of the
dogs,
which she admitted, which she openly said, which is one of the reasons that I didn't get mad at her, was because she was very honest about why she acted the way she did, why she liked dogs, because she was disappointed with the relationships she had with her father figure.
Right.
He was like a drill sergeant, and she ran away when she was 15 years old.
Okay.
She became a stripper. She's been through a lot of things in her life, and I can understand that her view of the world could be a bit skewed, as many people's are. And I'm not in a place to blame her, but I am in a place to say that her life choices of buying more things than she can afford, 10 SUVs, and buying things artificially cheaper than they should be. Due to,
and why are they artificially cheaper?
The things she buys or a lot of us buy, are artificially cheaper. The prices are lowered because labor costs are much lower for these corporations, because they don't pay people in other countries as much as they deserve, as much as they need to live healthily.
Right. I mean, so when we're talking about class, it's not simply how much money you make based on your level of education. It's also what you are considered worthy in terms of an artificial economy.
Right.
So when we're talking about, not only is labor cheaper in other countries, but their lives, their very lives, are considered less valuable than an American.
I mean, and that's demonstrated in war, when we're willing to sacrifice 100,000 of civilian lives, innocent civilian lives, who we're not even claiming are doing anything wrong, for 10,000 or 5,000 of American soldiers.
Yeah.
We're saying, we're making a statement that their lives are less valuable than ours.
Or if the ostensible reason, for example, for Iraq is 9/11, then okay, 3,000 or actually 2,800 American deaths. Well, they're not all Americans.
What about Hiroshima or Nagasaki?
Well, yeah, there is that. And again, people of color versus Americans, et cetera, et cetera. But let's look at, for example, one incident in terms of crime. So an American soldier a white American soldier rapes a 15-year-old Iraqi woman and murders her family. Okay? And when it finally comes to trial,
A 15-year-old
Iraqi woman,
okay,
and her family, right? So she's gang raped and her family's murdered
by a soldier.
by a soldier, a
US
United States. I think it was a Marine, but whatever. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
All right, white, right, from the South. Right. So the reason I'm making these comparisons now is because if we look at death penalty in America for the same crime, how many white people get sentenced to death for raping and killing black women?
Right. Not very many.
Not very many. Nearly none.
Right.
And so these guys actually aren't even sentenced to death. They're sentenced. He's going to be out in 20 years, right? So one of those pieces. So what if that person had killed an American soldier? They go off about Jessica Lynch or whatever, but again, if the race had been reversed, would we have the same sentence, or we'd be crying for blood?
Right.
Because it is not too long ago that people were getting lynched for merely looking at a white woman cross-eyed, or whistling, right? And then a jury of their peers would basically say, well, no crime had been done. So we look at
of their peers.
Of their peers, right? So we look at life not being considered equal, human life being considered equal, and an American life being essentially worth more than any person of color outside of the United States or even within the United States. So class isn't just about how much money you make, but how much you're considered worthy, or what. I mean, there's no escaping that, worthy. And who decides what that is? Who decides what the labor is?
Yeah. I've got another quick wife swap story to share.
Please.
That's related. So for the purposes of the show, there's rules changing, and they brought a Hummer to the Eco Village that we had to drive in, right? And so...
In the interest of disclosure, he did not drive. You didn't get to keep the Hummer.
No, we did not get to keep the Hummer.
Because he drove in you drove in your grandmother's, what looks like a Subaru or something like that.
Yeah, Subaru. But so one of the 9 people in the crew, the film crew on our side, was black, right? And he was driving the Hummer in a parking lot by Fifth Street Market. And a police officer spotted this black man getting into the Hummer.
No!
And talked to him. And because it was a rental car, it wasn't his name wasn't on the insurance, he talked to him for close to an hour about, to make sure that he had the right to drive this car.
Wow.
And
okay, Eugene.
I mean, I can't prove that this police officer...
Sky, come on.
But
it's not that racial profiling hasn't happened in this town.
Right.
But let's get real here, okay? Because, those of you who are seeing this, let's take this as an example of what will happen when black athletes come for the Olympic trials, okay? Driving whatever vehicles that they're driving.
Right.
All right? So was the Hummer reported stolen? No.
No.
Okay?
Definitely not.
It's rented by ABC.
Yes.
Right? So Disney. So it's on a corporate thing. So no, his name is not on it because he's crew.
Right.
So you're talking to this guy for an hour. Why?
I mean, I didn't actually want to see that cop because that cop had previously given me a ticket. But yeah, I wasn't, in that exchange, but I witnessed the exchange from 25 feet away.
Yeah.
And had to wait there.
Yeah. So again, there are certain class assumptions where,
Definitely.
I've had this conversation with, a former black police officer, who now is an insurance agent, drives Beamers, Cadillacs, et cetera, so a number of people have, talked
from
about.
A cop to an insurance agent.
Well, better money, right?
Oh, I guess so.
And all that kind of stuff. So I noticed also You know, the one time that I had gotten pulled over, you know, and racially profiled was when I was driving a beater car in Whitaker. Right, so you know, and I'm working. No, well, but I mean, it was one of those things where, you know, I'm driving back from my Whitebird softball game, you know, in my beater cars, you know, 74 Valiant, slant 6, smokes a little, you know, the James Bond smoke screen, right? But you know, I'm driving by, you know, from the Whitebird softball game, and I notice, you know, that there's a police car in back of me, and I'm from LA, so all right, I got my license, got my insurance, I'm cool, everything's working. Oh, well, the next time that I'm going to go, well, I'm going home, it's Sunday, so, oh, crap. The easiest way to get home is going to look like I'm trying to get away. Left turn, right turn, left turn, right turn, right? But that's what I have to do, you know, because I'm living in Whitaker, right? And it's, you know, Washington Jefferson Park, so you have to make those turns. So the lights come on at the Red Barn, right? I'm around the corner from the house at the time, right? So I'm okay, you know, fine, you know. What's the problem, officer? You know, oh, it's a woman cop, cool, fine, great. What's happening, officer? Well, your left tail light is blinking intermittently. Oh, right, okay, excuse number 357. Fine. Right. It, you know, of course it's working because I go to check it out. Oh, don't bother, right? Okay, can I see your license and registration? Sure, here it is. You know, so she looks at my license and says, have you ever been arrested? Oh, we're going from a taillight to my arrest. Have you been arrested? Have I been arrested? No, you know, it's Sunday. So I go, yeah, I was arrested once when I was 17. You know, because she can see how old I am, 35.
So you must be a fugitive.
So she said, 17 arrests? So I go, no, I was arrested once when I was 17. What was that for, theft? Okay, and so at this point now, going, no. So I'm looking at her badge, you know, because this is harassment, right? And so she kind of jumps back like I'm looking at her breast, and what are you staring at? Well, your pistol marksmanship badge, officer. Okay, so I'm wearing my Whitebird T-shirt because I just came from a softball game. So I'm Whitebird's drug counselor, one of them, all right? So I have experience in drugs and counseling. I'm basically a thesis away from a master's degree, all right? So I have to have experience with drugs and counseling, and I was arrested in a car with 9 other youth, you know, and they thought we were smoking weed and, you know, LAPD, yada, yada, yada. So that's the only arrest I had, expunged, boom, no probation, nothing. So that's the only time I was arrested. 17 arrests? No. So, you know, do you have any warrants?
Right.
Yeah, right, okay. So needless to say, we went on that after that. So I'm beating, black man, beater car, Whitaker, yada, 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 right? So I didn't get pulled over when I was driving a Volvo.
No?
No. Never. Not once. Okay? Except for speeding, which, of course, I'm from LA. I tend to speed, especially if I'm late for an appointment up here. So I got tickets coming up 30th. Yeah.
Right. That's not being arrested. That's
yeah. But, you know, and those are legitimate. And, you know, look, I'm from LA, I speed. I agree, right? And no racial comments ever came happening with doing that. But I just noticed that I got stopped several times in that Valiant that week.
Well,
right?
Definitely time for a different car.
Okay, right? But, you know, once I got to Volvo, no racial profiling stuff at all. So there is that whole class thing.
Yeah,
with black man driving Hummer, black man driving Volvo. I guess Volvos are less, you know, associated with drug dealers or something like that.
I mean, I've had a similar experience with getting pulled over for being young, and I know this because I was at a stoplight.
Yeah.
And a cop turned, it was his turn to turn, and I saw him staring at me, and he was like, "Wow, that kid's 16 or ish, you know." Yeah. And so he was going the other direction. And then, so I waited for my turn to, for the light to turn. And so I went, and I guess he looped around. I was watching him, and he just started following me for roughly a mile until he pulled me over. and he pulled me over because I turned into the wrong lane. You're supposed to turn into the closest lane. I turned into the second one on accident.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't remember doing that, but
Yeah.
and so he just asked me like a whole row of questions, you know, and I know that wouldn't have happened if I was, 30 years older, you know?
Yes. Right. Right. So when we look at or driving a higher class of car, shall we say, right? Or in the South Hills, or any number of things. So when we look at class issues, because we were basically winding down, what do you think are some solutions?
I have little faith in our voting system in this country right now, and so
do you vote?
I would vote. I would love to vote.
Okay.
I'm 16 years old.
Okay.
And I'm gonna miss the presidential elections, these upcoming ones, by 4 months.
Okay.
And so that's not an option for me. But I think that the most powerful way for the average citizen to vote currently is through their dollars, through their consumer choices. Make sure that the things that you buy are not affiliated with slave labor and aren't coming from China in like some sweatshop, because that's how people are being oppressed, and that's how we're allowing it. That's the only way that we can really, or that's the easiest way for us to stop.
So one could ask, how does that help homeless youth here? What would you do for homeless youth here?
Homeless youth in Eugene.
Yeah.
I think just opening a center, more places for people to go. Also having different policies for standing downtown.
Yeah.
I was just the day before yesterday, I went in front of the library to talk to one of my friends. I was there for 5 minutes or less before the security officer told me that I was loitering and needed to leave.
You clearly look like a drug dealer.
I know, huh? I must be. I'm under 18. I'm under 20, whatever.
Yeah. You must be a troubled youth.
I must
troubled,
be.
poor, homeless youth, right?
Causing trouble and havoc downtown.
Yeah.
And I would like to be able to exist downtown.
Yeah.
I'd like these security guards, rent-a-crops, whatever you want to call them, to be briefed on how to be compassionate towards youth and other minorities or other oppressed groups.
Yeah, well, because youth are currently the majority on the planet, actually.
Yeah, I guess so. So not minorities, but...
But again, when we talk about,
those with less
the
power.
Concentration of power, et cetera, et cetera. I've been in town long enough, and you kind of know my record through my daughter, but one of the things that we have attempted to do, actually, is have a youth center on the mall.
Right, that'd be great.
Well, we did for a while. But the problem was not that it was run by the YMCA. It was run by the YMCA, but what they were thinking of it as a rec center, and what the reality is, the people that were coming to it were homeless youth. Right?
Wanted to lay down,
Well, the YMCA is not configured to do social service on that level. So they, duh. Of course you put, a youth center and on the mall.
The youth are going to come there.
The youth are going to come there,
Currently
and they're going to bring
library.
their issues, and boom, there they were. So they weren't ready for that, and I think if we created a youth center, we should be ready to deal with those youth. I mean that's a powerful suggestion.
Showers,
Yeah. A Station 7 or something like that.
Right.
Right.
And I think that if we had more of those centers, like you could have, like right now, Station 7, like there's really hard kids that go there.
Yeah.
And if you had a lot more of those centers, you could have the centers for the really tough kids, and you could have the centers for the kids that don't want to deal with that. And I think that they would filter themselves out.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that this community could use a lot. But
any other final thoughts?
No, sir.
Well, that's good. Okay. All right. Well, In terms of that youth center, one of the things that you'd like to see would be what?
The staff are a key.
Staff that are friendly to youth, as well
Yeah.
as youth staff.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, both. Like I said, showers, maybe a place to take a nap, activities.
Okay.
And I'd like to see people, the staff, actively trying to involve youth in leadership roles within the center and trying to decipher what they think these youth could get interested in or are interested in now, and then how to help them help the community.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we should
assist them to help the community.
We should definitely have a further conversation about this, and
Yeah.
we'll talk some more. If you've liked what you've seen tonight, send us feedback at the following address: liveclass@lanecc.edu. And if you have any suggestions about further shows and further topics, send that in as well. We love that feedback. So thanks, Sky, for coming in.
Thank you.
This has been DiversiTV. I'm Mark Harris, and tune in next week